you're relatively at the beginning of your course, right? But what you're going to discover is that throughout this course, you're probably going to be visiting a lot of cemeteries, a lot of burial places. And I think it's an interesting question, but why we're going to spend so much time in a guiding course to be visiting burial places and cemeteries? There's actually a very simple, short answer to that, which is burial teaches us a lot about a society. It teaches us about their religious beliefs. It teaches us what kind of professions people followed, what kind of jobs they worked at. It teaches us what they thought about death. It teaches us what they thought about memory, commemoration, okay? It can teach us things about even modern society, okay? And this is a good reason to visit cemeteries, anywhere in the world, by the way. And they're all very different. By the way, those who are behind me, I cannot project 360 degrees. I have something else that's not one of them, and I'm not on the mic. So if you want to hear me sitting in front of me, I'm not going to do a 360.
Don't worry, we are fine with you.
That's too much.
You are beautiful from the front and from the back. No worries.
Okay. So, I think that in your lectures, you've learned a little bit about burial. Okay, and since we are here at a major ancient necropolis, necropolis means city of the dead, we're an ancient necropolis in this country, which happens to be a Jewish one. I want to trace what we know about Jewish burial from the earliest time that we know it till today, and see, is it the same, is it different, what influences, what impacted it. Have you guys visited, or will you visit, I don't know, but you don't know, in this course, Ketef Hinnom?
Yes.
Yes, you visited, or yes, you will visit?
Yes, we visited.
Okay. Did you get to Saint Etienne?
Did what?
Saint Etienne? No. Okay.
Saint Etienne, listen.
Okay. So you went to Ketef Hinnom. I don't know when you were there because it's totally exposed, so it's hot, and I don't know how much you were listening to what's going on there. Have you been in the Israel Museum?
Yes.
As a course already? Did you see the reconstruction of a tomb in Ketef Hinnom?
Yes.
Not all of us, because it.
Okay.
Yes,
so
not
just for
all.
your information.
It's in video, by the way, on YouTube.
Thank you. Okay, for your information, in the Israel Museum, in the archaeology wing, there's actually a complete reconstruction of one of the tombs that was found in Ketef Hinnom. Having said that, the reason I asked you, been to Saint Etienne is a church. It's in East Jerusalem, and within that church you have complete whole Jewish tombs from the Old Testament times, from the Hebrew Bible, from the same time as Ketef Hinnom, except not destroyed and not quarried, complete. Just so you know, it's not open to the public. You can get in there different ways, but it's something you should be aware of. Okay.
Saint Etienne.
So since Saint Etienne, so if you guys did already visit Ketef Hinnom, you know that. And by the way, here I have to say something that's also important. I'm going to make a distinction right now between burial of either wealthy or important people, quote unquote, and the common people. Because certainly in antiquity, and to a certain extent today, there seems to be a little bit of a difference about what tombs look like if you're super wealthy, you're the king, or somebody very special or whatever, and the common people. So when you went to Ketef Hinnom, I don't know if this is, who guided you there? You got it there?
Oren.
Oren? Okay. So I assume that Oren probably said it. These are the wealthy Jews of Jerusalem.
Right.
Okay, not your everyday Owen or Avi or whatever. Yeah, it's really the wealthy people. And what he described to you, okay, was carving out artificial caves out of the soft dolomite and limestone, right? The caves, the rooms themselves are actually structurally and dimensionally designed as rooms that we find in Syria, not Syria, Syria, meaning what today is Iraq, right? Well, it's after Mesopotamia, before, okay? But it's, let's say Assyria, but right, Besedo, okay? Well done.
You can say that.
All right, that's fine. Tamam. So Assyria, and the dimensions and the look, meaning there's already impact civilizationally from the northeast from here, and the fact that you buried people's possessions with them in the secondary burial, right? It's also something that's similar to what we're familiar with in Egypt. So we have two super
Powers.
powerful civilizations that are influencing how the Jews are going to bury, and you have there a secondary burial, right? After 11 months, you gather the bones, put them in the repository
family,
there,
yes.
which would appear, I assume Oren said this as well, I don't know, I hope I'm not going to contradict anything, but the assumption is that in Judaism at that time, the idea of a resurrection, if it exists at all, is very, very weak, okay? Because it'll be kind of complicated, like the one place with Gabi Balke found 95 skeletons of 5 generations from the same family based on the DNA, with all them mixed up, the hip bone and this bone and that bone connected, all these, probably kind of be difficult, although for God nothing's difficult. It might be difficult to resurrect the people when there's a big mishmash and mixing up of the bones, but there's a secondary burial. And this you're familiar with, right? Fast forwarding, have you guys visited the tombs in the Kidron yet?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So and of course you were in the
Absalom,
and,
Chazir,
and of course you were in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which completely connects to what I'm talking about. In other words, burial for Jews in the Second Temple period, particularly from, let's say, 1st century BCE, going down to, let's say, 2nd, 3rd centuries CE. Okay, we can talk as a generalization, right? We have burial with ossuaries, meaning after 11 months,
They collect the bones
collect
and
the
the
bones, and we place it in an ossuary, and that would have been the main way of Jewish burial when Jesus was buried. Okay, and then almost parallel, but slightly afterwards, we have the use of sarcophagus or sarcophagi.
It's a Roman.
Okay, and you guys are familiar with that. But in terms of huge monumental tombs, yeah, do we have that?
We have it in
Were
the
you in the
Kidron.
Kidron?
Yes, we have
Oh,
it,
yeah, so
Kidron.
evidently they exist. Okay, again, the wealthy people. So what I'm trying to say is, despite what people may think today, if they're Jewish, that Jewish burial is modest. I'm sorry, I have lots of monumental Jewish burial from antiquity through today. Okay, for the wealthy people, for the kings, for the aristocracy, for the priests. Okay. Here we're going to see the next stage, because the burial here is more or less, 2nd century CE, but really more 3rd century CE, going down to about 6th century CE. Okay, more or less, this is the about 300, 400 year period. You're going to see monumental tombs here, but again, virtually everybody buried here based on the inscriptions. Here we have a lot of writing. Here we have a lot of writing based on the inscriptions, based on the language, based on what they say here. We get the impression that the people buried here are either very wealthy people, or they're very important religious leaders or political leaders. That's the impression we're going to get from the inscriptions. It wasn't a spoiler, but it's something just to know. Now, let me just fast forward for a moment, okay? And in Israel today, when you walk into a Jewish cemetery, if you're a Jew coming from abroad, the Jewish cemeteries in Israel look very strange. The first reaction of Jews who come from abroad, when you take them into a Jewish cemetery, say, oh, what, in Israel you bury the dead above the ground? Because what they see is the marker of the grave looks like a rectangular box that's above the ground, which is not the way Jews bury the dead outside of the Middle East. But who buries the dead that way in our region?
Christians.
Muslims and Christians. In other words, the dominant civilization here for at least the last 800 years is a Muslim one, okay? Which means that both Christians, Muslims, and Jews, the burial, the way that they bury, the way the tombstones look, are very, very similar. American Jew has to be buried in a coffin, in a box. That's the law. In Israel, Jews don't get buried in coffins.
No.
Jews are brought on stretcher,
On the coffin.
and either the body is wrapped up in a talit, in a shroud, or it's got a blanket covering it, and the body is lowered into the ground as is.
Yes.
Okay, which is exactly. But I'm talking about Jewish burial. We'll get to Muslims, but that's exactly not the way Jews are buried in North America or South America. It's exactly not that way. There's only one category of Jews in Israel who are not buried that way, but are buried in coffins. It's actually two categories. Anybody who died while serving in one of the security forces. Doesn't matter if it's police, if it's Shabak, if it's the army, it doesn't matter what, or somebody who got killed in a terror attack. And the reason for both these two categories is that if, God forbid, the person who died was killed, let's say, into a bombing, you don't want the family to see body parts or whatever's left of the body on the stretcher, and therefore they are buried in coffins, in wooden coffins. Meaning, there is no problem in halakha, in Jewish law, to bury the dead in wooden coffins. That's what's done in the U.S. and Canada because that's the law there. And Jews don't have a problem with that. But they don't do it here because it's not the local tradition of the Jews. Okay, I'm just trying to show you that Jewish burial from First Temple period, through the Second Temple period, through the Byzantine period, till today, has always been impacted and influenced by the dominant civilization within which Jews have lived. There is virtually zero independent Jewish burial thinking that is completely out of the box, pun intended, okay? For those who understood what I meant, okay? Out of the box burial. It's always been impacted by the dominant civilization within which Jews have lived. This is very, very important for understand. But then you will have a Jewish twist or a Jewish meaning sometimes to the burial itself. This, by the way, is going to be true of Muslims and Christians as well, okay? A Muslim who's living in America has to abide by the laws in America and not by the Middle East, and will have to bury the way they do there. By the way, we can't say one thing about a Jewish tradition. We do not cremate the dead. There's no cremation. The only example we have, as far as I know, if Oren can correct me, I'll be happy, the only examples in Jewish history of cremation is King Saul. In the Tanakh, King Saul and his sons were going to be cremated by the people of Yavesh Gilad, who take their dead bodies off the walls of the city of Beit Sha'an. But I assume somebody who's going to guard you Beit Sha'an will tell you that story. They should tell you that story. That's the only example in Jewish history that I know of Jews being cremated. Why? Because it's considered in Jews to be a desecration of the dead. We don't cremate. You have a different example?
Holocaust.
No, but Jews who were cremated there were murdered, and it wasn't. We didn't have agency. We didn't get to choose how our bodies are going to be disposed of.
On the soul,
I'm talking
on the
about,
soul.
from a Jewish perspective, we don't do that. Okay. Now I'm saying all this because. Wait 1 second. Hang on a second. I'm saying all this to you. Hold on a second. Because when we're going to see different kinds of burial here. Inside the catacombs, we're going to see different kinds of burial, all Jewish. Okay. There is a tendency to try to theologically understand this because we have something that is introduced into Judaism, and it's big time in Christianity for sure, which is this issue of resurrection, which really doesn't have, to be honest with you, a lot of space in Judaism of the First Temple period. You can read into text, but there's nothing explicit. It's definitely not, that's not the vibe and not the understanding in First Temple period Judaism. It's going to emerge for sure in Second Temple period Judaism, but the question is it connected to the sites we're going to see here or not? And it's still a big question mark. Most of the scholars who put that on this are Christian scholars because they are, of course, concerned about the story of Jesus and resurrection. And Jesus is buried as a Jew, as a wealthy Jew, right?
He's not his.
Is he buried as a wealthy Jew?
Yes, because the owner was wealthy. Yes.
Yes, Joseph Arimathea.
The owner of the.
I didn't say he's wealthy. I said he was buried as a wealthy Jew.
Right.
As a wealthy Jew. I was very precise, very exact in what I'm saying. Okay, so from a Christian perspective, there's been this try to understand the Jewish kind of burial in the time of Jesus and how it reflects an idea of resurrection, but that might be projecting backwards to a place that's not actually the case. We have to be very cautious and careful. 1 second, there's a question behind me here.